مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. شهد العام الماضي دخول هيلاري كلينتون التاريخ. كانت أول امرأة يرشحها للرئاسة أحد حزبينا السياسيين الرئيسيين، وبالرغم من أنها خسرت الانتخابات فقد حصلت على ما يقرب من 3 مليون صوت أكثر من دونالد ترامب، ولكنها ليست السيدة الوحيدة في كتب التاريخ. ضيفتنا اليوم دخلت التاريخ بدورها كأول سيدة تنتمي إلى الحزب الجمهوري تفوز مرتين بالانتخابات لحاكم ولاية في بلادنا، ومنذ ذلك الحين وهي قوة رئيسة في مضمار السياسة القومية، وكانت أحد أعضاء مجلس وزراء الرئيس حيث تولت مسؤولية حماية البيئة، إضافة إلى كونها صوتا فخورا للاعتدال في وقت يشهد صعود التطرف من اليسار ومن اليمين. هل هناك مكان في السياسة الأمريكية اليوم للوسط السياسي؟ وهل مهدت هزيمة هيلاري الطريق لتولي سيدة للرئاسة، أم أنها قللت من احتمال انتخابنا للسيدة أما قريب؟ للإجابة عن هذه الأسئلة يسرني أن أرحب في برنامج داخل واشنطن بالحاكمة السابقة لولاية نيوجيرزي كريستين تود ويتمان. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. I'm sitting here today with former governor of New Jersey, former head of the Environmental Protection Agency, Christine Todd Whitman. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
So, Governor, are you a Republican?
I'm an Eisenhower Republican is how I say it.
What does that mean?
That means I'm the kind of Republican that does believe in less government and more control people have of their own lives, and less taxes so they can spend their own money the way they want to, but in the fact we should be protecting our environment, our shared environment, that we have a strong national defense, that we have an international policy that is balanced, and then we get out of people's lives.
And should I assume that by calling yourself an Eisenhower Republican, that means you're not a Trump Republican?
I am most definitely not, and I would think that he would say the same. No, the Republican Party has changed a great deal since I grew up, and it is no longer a party of limited government, of balanced budgets, which is what we've always been in the past. It's no longer a party that's seeking ways to get government out of your daily life. We seem to be trying to get into it more and more, and so I'm just not in sync with the way they are thinking and acting today. We were also a party that reached across the lines, the party lines, to get things done.
So do you think that your party shifted and that the election of President Trump reflects that shift? Or did President Trump and whatever he represents pull your party to a different place than where it was before?
It's a combination. I mean, the party was certainly changing. It has been over the years because we have taken for granted the opportunity to pick our own leaders in this country. We haven't voted in the way that we should. In fact, until most recent election cycles, the average voter turnout in the primaries, that first opportunity to pick your candidates, has been about 10%. When you only have 10% of the people voting, those are your most dedicated partisan political people, and they tend to be a bit on the extreme. And so for the general elections, people are looking at candidates that have gotten even more and more extreme, and they said, well, I don't agree with either one, so they don't vote. And that has allowed those with the loudest voices, and they may not be the greatest in number, but the loudest voices to control. And in fact, for President Trump, if you look at the voter turnout, only 38% of the people elected, of the eligible voters, elected this president.
Would you suggest going back to the Eisenhower era when a small group of party leaders picked a more moderate, acceptable candidate?
Well, we didn't do all badly back in those days, but obviously you want the public to have a part in the process, which they did back then, too. I mean, we had vibrant conventions. I mean, those conventions, and I went to a number of them starting at a very early age, as a very young child. But no, and going to these conventions, yes, you had backroom deals, but you don't think we didn't have it at the last convention? Absolutely. And so what we need is to be in a position where the candidates have to speak to the majority of the people, and the majority of the people in this country are still in the center. But you don't have to talk to them anymore, because those aren't going to be the people who turn up at the polls. It's going to be the extremes. So if you're a Republican, you go for your extreme right base. If you're a Democrat, you go for your more extreme left base. And Democrats are starting to go to the left in the same way Republicans have gone to the right, and I believe that's a danger for the country.
So how do you and people like you in your party pull your party back to closer to the center?
Well, we support things such as the No Labels Coalition, which exists in Congress today. It's something we have the Problem Solvers Caucus within Congress. It's a group of Republicans and Democrats, 41 Republicans, 41 Democrats, it's always even, who have come together to say, we're here to solve problems, not just to represent our parties. And they have agreed that if 75% of them take a position on an issue such as health care, they'll vote as a bloc. That starts to become meaningful when you have a Congress that is split, or a Senate that is split and close, and the leaders are going to have to deal with them. And you have to support people like that who are willing to stand up to do more, to represent more than just partisan politics.
So that's an answer to the question of how you address partisanship. Mm-hmm. How do you pull your own party back from where it is today, if in your view you think it's too extreme?
Well, I think the American people are going to start to do that, the Republicans. I mean, yes, Donald Trump has a base of some 38% that is always going to be with him. The thing is to reach out to the rest of it, and for Republicans to say, those moderate Republicans in the center saying, look, we want problems solved. Are you watching problems being solved today? No, we are not seeing. We're seeing such terrible gridlock in Washington, and a president who has not had the experience within the political structure to understand how you work with Congress. It's a very different thing than sitting behind a table saying you're fired to your own personnel. I mean, you can't do that in government. And in the international field, someone who doesn't seem to understand that words matter, and language that you use or tweet at 2 a.m. can have really serious consequences.
Now, you've been quite vocal in your criticism of President Trump and various decisions. I'm going to ask you in a moment about certain aspects of this, the environmental set of issues. But many major Republican figures have kept quiet.
Right.
And most in Congress have gotten on the bandwagon. Is this surprising? Is this regrettable?
It's disappointing, because what it is their job is more important. I've always believed in term limits. The legislative branch has always thought term limits was a very good thing for the executive branch, but not for themselves. And my feeling is if you knew you only had that job for a certain amount of time, you'd focus on trying to get things done. Unfortunately, when that becomes your life's vocation, your life's work, all you want to do is keep the job. And if, as is true particularly in the House, where the districts are designed so that if you're a Republican, you're in a red district, and a Democrat's in a blue district, and you don't have to worry about the other party, just your own base, all you do is care about sticking to the party line because you want to keep those supporters behind you. And that leads to this kind of gridlock that we see today.
It sounds like a very regrettable situation from your perspective.
Well, I think it is. And if you look back at the history of the United States, we wouldn't be here today if people hadn't realized that compromise or reaching consensus, maybe is a better way to put it, wasn't critical. I mean, if people don't think that Thomas Jefferson and John Adams didn't have widely different opinions on how government should be structured and what kind of government we should have, then they haven't read their history. And yet those two, along with a host of other men at the time, were able to come together and give us a Constitution that is so powerful today and has done such wonderful things for the United States. But they agreed, they didn't compromise their personal principles, they just agreed to find consensus on something that was bigger than them.
Before I start to ask you about environmental issues, is there anything you can point to in the first half year or so of President Trump's administration that you said to yourself, well, he got that one right?
Well, he's certainly gotten how to reach the American people right, reach his base, and get his base excited. He does a very good job of that, and he's done it better than, frankly, any other politician, or he wouldn't be where he is today. On a policy perspective, there's not as much that I would point to because there just hasn't been that much done, finalized and accomplished. And what has been done primarily, and not just in the environmental field, but in others as well, has been the rollback of regulations while that's not inherently unusual or a bad thing in a new administration, it seems to be in this instance, it just is, if it has Obama's name anywhere near it, it's gone. Good, bad, or indifferent. And that's not the way to judge these issues.
All right, let's turn to the environment. One of the president's biggest decisions early in the administration was to pull the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord. Mm-hmm. Was this a good decision?
I don't think so, no.
Why?
I mean, when you have an accord that was reached by almost 200 different nations around the world after working on it for years and years, I mean, Mother Nature couldn't care less about geopolitical boundaries, and what happens in one country affects another, one state affects another. Can you say that you should work on it a little bit more? That's fine, but you stay engaged to work on it. To just walk away from it is saying to the rest of the world, well, essentially with what this president has said from the beginning, I don't believe in climate change, I don't believe in humans having an impact, that kind of an impact, and we don't want any part of it. And that is counter to science. It's counter to what these other countries have spent a lot of time focusing on, and it's bad for human health, and it's going to affect all of us eventually.
And you've played a role in the evolving Republican debate, or even probably general debate over climate change in our public life. Is it your view that before the president's decision, this was now a settled issue for the overwhelming majority of voters, of public figures, namely man's role in climate change?
Well, if you look at any poll today, it will tell you that better than 50% of the American people believe that climate change is real, humans are having a huge impact, and we should be doing something about it. So that's where the majority of the American people are today. They know it, they see it. They see it from the storm surges, they see it from the hurricanes, they see it from the droughts and the fires. It's having a real impact on their lives today. What they haven't seen necessarily and understood completely is the fact that this is a national security issue for us as well. Because when you see the kind of droughts you have in sub-Sahara, for instance, that means the migrant herdsmen can no longer keep their herds going because they can't find food for them, grazing for them. They're moving into towns that are not prepared for them, that don't have the infrastructure, don't have jobs for them. And unfortunately, those become areas where those who don't have the best interests of the United States at heart can find recruits and go and look for them. And you can understand it, because if somebody promises you, I'll get you a job, I'll get you water, I'll get you food for your family, you're going to go along with it. So we need to care about this issue as not only something that affects us dramatically here, as we've seen from the last two hurricanes, but because of what it means for us across the globe.
Okay, when we come back, we're going to talk more with Governor Christine Todd Whitman about politics, the environment, and women in American politics in just a moment. Governor Christine Todd Whitman is a trailblazing leader in politics, energy, and the environment on the state, national, and international levels. She served in the cabinet of President George W. Bush as administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, earning bipartisan praise for the practical, effective efforts she took to protect our water, to limit the emission of dangerous gases, and to clean up contaminated sites. Before that federal position, she was elected to serve as the 50th governor of the state of New Jersey, serving 2 terms as its first woman chief executive. In those elections, she set 2 additional firsts. She was the first Republican woman ever to defeat an incumbent governor, in a general election, and then she was the first Republican woman in the country ever to be reelected as governor. The author of a New York Times bestseller called It's My Party Too, Governor Witman is now president of the Witman Strategy Group, a consulting firm that specializes in energy and environmental issues. A graduate of Wheaton College, her first political involvement dates back to Nelson Rockefeller's unsuccessful presidential bid in 1968. She has 2 children and 7 grandchildren. So you recently wrote this in the New York Times. I have been worried about how the Environmental Protection Agency would be run ever since President Trump appointed Scott Pruitt, the former Attorney General of Oklahoma, to oversee it. The past few months have confirmed my fears. Why is this nominee not living up to your hopes and expectations?
Well, I was hoping that once he was in office, he'd gain a broader view of what environmental protection was all about. When he was Attorney General of Oklahoma, he spent a lot of time suing the Environmental Protection Agency to roll back regulations. And I was hoping that when he got into the office and saw the scope and the breadth of what he had to handle and the entire country to which he was responsible, that he would broaden his horizons as well. But he hasn't. And what we've seen from him, besides the fact that he has kind of shrunk the office, and that you have to be escorted into the office. You can't take a cell phone into the office. The kinds of things you want to say, really? I mean, really? But anyway, he has made it a point to roll back regulations, and is very supportive of the budget that the president has proposed for the agency, but cut it by almost a third. And yet at the same time, they say they want to protect human health and the environment. Well, you can't do that when you're cutting back the agency to the degree that he's proposing and that the president's proposing they do. So it's been disappointing. It's been disappointing also to see the attitude towards science. There's a denigration of science. There's a questioning of science. And there's this attitude that we don't really need a lot of scientists, so they're doing away with some of the science advisory panels. And the Environmental Protection Agency is an agency based on science. It doesn't happen that people wake up one morning and say, I wonder whose life I can make miserable now. I'll come up with a new regulation. It's based on new findings of what impacts human health, what's important to protect humans, what's important to protect the health of the environment on which we all depend. And it has to go through a long process. You do a potential rulemaking. You go out there with the first step, and you have to have people get to see it. They get to comment. You have to answer every comment, and then you go out with a final rule. So it's a long process, and it's a very thorough one. And if it's not based on science, if it's only based on politics, we're going to end up in a very bad place.
Now, in that same New York Times article, you wrote that you endorsed the free market approach to solving many environmental issues. You still endorse that. What does that mean in practice?
Well, it means that, yes, you have to have some federal regulations. I do believe that the federal government should set the floor on what's safe for human health and for the health of the environment. But then you let states and the private sector figure out how they get there on their own. And if state wants to go beyond what the federal government requires, God bless them. But I have found, too, that companies, when we were, for instance, doing a regulation to control the non-road diesel engines, tractors, backhoes, things like that, which are actually worse for people's health than the on-road ones. There are just more of them. They tend to be in cities where the air doesn't dissipate as quickly, so people are breathing in this stuff that is bad for your health. It took one company to say, we can do this, and then they all fell into line. And it actually has promoted new investment by companies. It's promoted new technology development. It's been good for the economy. And so we need to, but you have to let the private sector do that. The government can't come up with every specific on how you reach the targets. What they need to do is say, this is what we know from a scientific point of view represents the base of the floor for what you can put out into the atmosphere, nothing more than that. And then let the companies figure out how to do it on their own, rather than tell them how to do every step of the way.
So you travel around the country quite a bit, and you speak to all sorts of people. What's the most hopeful, optimistic, good news that you can tell our viewers about what's going on out there in the hustings about American politics?
Well, the millennium generation, the young generation now coming up through college, is very civic-minded in the sense that they really want to make a difference in the world. They want to be engaged. Sure, they'd like to earn a good living, but the more important thing is to just to have enough to live a nice lifestyle, but to really be able to make things happen. The bad news of that is, but they don't want to do it through politics. They want nothing to do with politics. They want to do it through entrepreneurial and figuring out ways to help make people's lives better, and that's great. But if you want to make those changes permanent, you're going to have to engage in the political process at some point, and hopefully they will. They will be the single largest voting bloc in the next presidential election, bigger than the Gen X, bigger than the baby boomers, bigger than the even older senior citizens who vote in big numbers. So if they put their minds to it and get to the polls, they can make an enormous difference, and their motivation is pretty good.
So convince them that politics isn't a dirty word.
Well, that they can make it a better one.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Governor Witman, thank you so much for joining us on Dakhel, Washington.
بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، وخاصة حول الصراع بين الاعتدال والتطرف في بلدكم، أرجو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على عنوان البريد الإلكتروني التالي insidewashington@elhura.com. معكم روبرت ساتلوف، شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.